All right, look, welcome everybody. Sorry, we've just realised that a large number of people that said they were attending just haven't, so we're just checking links to find out if there's any technical reason why the number of attendees was there. So sorry to hold you up. We do like to keep these timely and on time. I'm Leon Stephan on behalf of Chris Morris and Dale Edwards, the partners at Advivo, and the entire Advivo team. I'd like to thank you to our 4th Business Booster event. We do these on a quarterly basis to share education, and sometimes we present, sometimes we have other presenters as well. The topic today is, does your business need a board? And we'll explore boards and alternatives of ways of providing advice to you. It is a question we're commonly asked, and we thought it's something that we should explore with you. So bit of housekeeping, if you could please have your cameras turned on and mute yourself to avoid any background noise. If you have questions to ask, please do. It's by the raise your hand digitally, or you can unmute and ask a question later on. We do try and make these as interactive as possible, so your questions are appreciated. We have received a number of questions prior, which we've used to help structure some of the topic that we talk through, and it's always valuable. So in future, we will take on board what you asked, so we're fulfilling you and adding value. The first thing I suppose I have to say is, as you can see on the screen, good accountant's disclaimer, but this is general discussion only. So we're talking about what we try and generalize it to make sure it suits the entire audience. If you have any specific questions you need to ask, feel free to contact us privately, and we'll answer your questions later on. And similarly, if we don't get to all the questions at the end, we will answer those privately as well. Boards. Often people think of formal boards, but there are a lot of alternatives, and Chris, who's co-presenting with me today, and I will discuss a number of those alternatives as we go through the day. I think the starting point's got to be that we would all agree that no one person possesses all the skills that's necessary to grow a business and make it successful, grow, de-risk it, and cover all the things, legal, accounting, marketing, HR, IT that they might need. So we go to boards or advisory and people for advice in some way, shape or form to have those skills. And that's where the starting point is, well, what skills do we have now? And a gap analysis to what skills are needed to supplement those. So quite often businesses start out with a range of technical skills, and then they need more legal, accounting, marketing, HR, IT as they go on. And as business grows and become more complex, you tend to need more and more of those. And that's where the questions come up. And the way we're going through the presentation today, it's probably a cascading sort of viewpoint of more complex down to less complex to suit the business at different stages. The options that we do discuss throughout the day too are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I want to cover that off there as well. So you might have a formal board and you'll have some of the options, and they will change over time. So we'll discuss that as we go through. But a board or an advisory board or a networking group, etc., they're all ways of bringing skills together to fill a gap that you might not have. That gap might be short term, it might be long term, and it will go on, and you'll still have professional advisors. The board has to fulfill a couple of things. Not only do they have the gaps you don't have, but you want them to be independent, they want to be objective, and they want to challenge you. I've sat on a number of boards over time, and I'll tell you, I resigned from one board because the founder of that company wanted to surround himself with yes people. When you have a public company, for example, that's one reason why you would need a formal board, because the legislation says you need 3 people. So he said, I need 3 people on the board, but he just wanted people that he thought had the skills, would look good for external investors, and that he could boss around and have his own way. That's not what a board should be. It should be independent, challenging, and devil's advocate for a lot of things because you want to explore all opportunities. So Kerry Packer was one of the people that was a really good advocate of saying that never always surround yourself with smartest people. So he used to have very famous lunches where he'd bring in a whole lot of highly skilled people and have these lunches to explore that. And if you've got people at the expertise level of Kerry Packer and they think you need a board and independent advice and objective view, then who's to say that we in small to medium businesses, which we're focusing on this presentation, can't benefit from that as well. One of the key things for whatever option you choose is to make sure that when you have some sort of advisory board, that you are prepared for it. You have formal agendas, you have structured times, information goes out before the meeting so people can read, digest and analyse it. So you don't want any sort of a board meeting to be a talk fest. It should be, here's the information, how do we make it, let's make the decisions on it. So they've got to get information early, and you don't, when you have a board, you've obviously got a number of people with competing time schedules. We're all time poor, so you need to have regular structured time frames. So, you know, the second Wednesday of the month or something like that, so that you aren't racing around chasing people to turn up and then people, you know, oh, I can't make it this month, etc. It should be structured. And if you've got people that regularly don't turn up, then it's time for them to go off the board. If you've got people that their skills were very useful 3 years ago, but the business has changed, you might need to change the board. They are dynamic and they should be considered that way, that it's nothing set in stone. It will change from time to time. There are some differences as well, you know, speaking of what boards are required and when. Not-for-profits, for example, they generally have to have a minimum of 3 people on a board. And there's differences between not-for-profits and for-profit businesses, but a lot of the requirements of a board are still the same, whether they are for profit or not for profit. A lot of people might be on a board though, the difference being it might be voluntary as opposed to a paid board member. And we'll talk about fees and risk and payment later on as we progress. So the right decision of what sort of board / advisory you need is not defined and set in stone. It will change over time as the business grows. And I'll pass over to Chris to explore a few more things before we get into analysing and exploring some of the options that are available. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Leon. Yeah, so looking at the different types of organisations, as Leon said, we'll focus this particular presentation more towards the small to medium enterprise space. The definition of small these days is up to 50 mil turnover. So, excuse me, and more often than not, over that level or even getting towards that level, the business will have a formal board structure in place, or at least they've got their board work sorted anyway. So we're really focusing this on the small to medium enterprises. That's actually who we believe have the greatest opportunity to benefit from some kind of board type structure. So that's where we're pitching it. So let's get into it, and let's just discuss the different types that there are. We've decided that the best way to go about this is just to list out the pros, the cons, and the timing or the circumstances where each option may suit particular businesses. So we'll run with that as a structure. And based on that, over to you, Leon, to kick off with formal boards, please.
Thanks, Chris. And starting with formal boards, and as we said, the most common one. There are statutory reasons. So as I said, public companies, if you raise capital, one of the first things people will look at and say, well, what's the board look like? Now, no one's going to invest in an individual. They need to know that there's longevity and continuity in a board. There's a financial service, a number of other areas that statutory requirements say you must have a board. We're talking about what are the options when you're considering it for yourself, and what should you take into account, accepting those statutory requirements. The the key part, as we said, is that going forward, you want the regular board meetings with your agendas. You'll look at all aspects, and this is one of the key differences of a formal board as opposed to some of the options. The formal board is looking at all aspects of the business. They will they are responsible. A formal board member is a director of a company, and a director of a company under the Corporations Act shares all the same risk and responsibility of someone who is a sole director of a company. So when someone's coming onto a formal board, they are taking on risk. And that's a good and a bad thing. It will mean they have a vested interest in the business because they are at risk as well. So they must put in significant effort, and they must put in time, and they will look at, as a board, the whole range of things that influence the business. They will look at the strategy, the direction, the adherence to the vision. So it sort of underwrites one of the things that you need to consider for any of the options. Unless you have a clear vision of where you want your business to go to, how can a board perform? So that's a prerequisite you must have before. Now that will change over time, and business obviously start off and they're local, then they're national, and then they might be international. And that's just one reason why the board might change. You might need to add people with international skills to your board that you don't have at the moment. Remember that boards, and we're talking about boards, is the separation between operational and direction. The board makes decision on the direction of the company. You should have in place your operational procedures and everything that tick over and go along, and the board is providing oversight on what's happening there, and obviously addressing anything that's going wrong. So they'll look at finance, marketing, with a structured process of going through that at every meeting. And because they are directors, they have risk, so there will be a lot of attention to the finances to make sure that that's in place. And they will also, as a board, you'll have additional costs, I suppose. The highest level of cost when you compare to some of the other options is going to be your board members need to be paid for their time, expertise, and the risks they take on. You will need to have directors and officers insurance that covers them, and they will need to be selected to align with your business and fill that gap analysis, be a cultural fit, and make sure that they share the vision and can work together as a board. I have seen boards that don't work well together, and if you have a board that's not working well together, it can impact heavily on the business. So selection of the board members and their skills and alignment is really important, that you need to think at the beginning. So it's not an easy decision to say, I need a board, and then what does that board look like? A lot of work needs to be done on it. Yeah, and I call it the old days, but quite often the original boards in some time ago would have been the founder of a business and accountant and lawyer. Well, it's not that at the moment. Life is a lot more complex. We live in a world that's driven by a whole range of things now that weren't around before. And quite frankly, a lot of accountants, lawyers aren't across all the international aspects that we need to cover. So a board needs to be broad, diverse, and challenge of the founders to give the complementing skills that aren't in the business already. So we've talked about they will have some additional costs to have a board, but that should be outweighed by the benefits you're receiving. It's probably going to be formal boards more appropriate for larger companies. So it would be very unusual, unless it's a startup that's well funded, that would have a significant board at the beginning. They would often, if you're doing a startup and there's a capital raising, you would see a board structure in place. But generally, most people starting up a business are not going to have that. They will bring in specific advice in the early stage of their business. And one of the other key triggers for, besides capital raising, is very common, is transition planning. So when you've got a multi-generation view for your business, quite often it's the founders are looking to retire, the next generation's taking over, that is an ideal trigger for a time when you would see a board come into place. You would have perhaps the founder go to an executive chair, non-executive chair role, the next generation, and bring in some additional skills that would complement that and transition through for a few years, and it might then later on see the full retirement of the non-executive chair. So that's another time that we would see that. Boards can also be implemented under wills, but temporary absences for ill health, etc., like that. So there's quite often other times like that formal boards would come in. Moving on to the next level, and I suppose for want of a better word, the level down is the advisory board. And as the name suggests, the advisory board is there to give advice. And that's the key difference between a formal board. A board is making decisions and they're paid for it, they're taking on the risk. An advisory board is a panel of people who have been selected, same process about gap analysis, what skills do we need to complement, broad, diverse, etc. But they give advice to, it might be an existing smaller board or the founding members, the family, to help grow the business, but advisory boards don't make a decision. They only give advice. So that's really important to understand. So they're not directors under the Corporations Act. And quite often you'll see advisory boards do change more regularly, being the members, and it's more, this is where the business is going at the moment. These are the skills we need at the moment. A year later, it's some more skills we need in a different area, whereas formal boards are more structured to longevity, and you might have one or two people change, but advisory boards will be more dynamic and changing. They still are giving up time and expertise, providing expertise. So an advisory board would be paid, but they don't take on the risk as directors. So they're a lesser involvement, and they tend to be looking at, sometimes they're more focused on certain areas than the whole of the business as a formal board. Quite often they're everything as well, but not making decisions. They're generally specialist industry expertise will be brought in as well at times. So you'll source people from tech or whatever that might be in advisory boards, as opposed to a formal board is a broader range of skills and generally a larger head count. I think that probably covers that. I'll hand back to Chris now to talk on networking groups as another alternative.
Thank you, Leon. So networking groups comes well, again, down another step. So we're sort of out of the board space, but we're still into getting advice on business, excuse me, on business issues and on the business side of things. And before I go too much further, I will say that I know that some people who will be watching this video afterwards are involved with some networking groups or even facilitate particular networking groups. And I am purely pointing out the pros and cons. And it's important that people are aware that there's different types of networking groups, and some are heavily swayed towards some things and others are heavily swayed towards others. So I'll just run through a few of those, but please know that not all of these will apply to all the different types of groups that there are out there. So like anything, do your research first if you're looking to go down this road. Firstly, there's a fundamental difference between the networking groups and those board groups that we've discussed so far. And that is that the boards and the boards that Leon's discussed are assembled groups of advisors, whereas networking groups will typically have a facilitator or two facilitators, and then there'll be a group of peers. So with that, so some of the pros, obviously, from a networking situation is that it can be a good forum where you can attend and you listen and learn how others have acted in certain circumstances. Sometimes you can learn from other people's mistakes, which it's always good to do that, as opposed to having to make them yourself. So I'm a big fan of that. One of the other pros is that being in business can be lonely. They say it's lonely at the top, and often if you're in business, you've got nobody to. If you're in business for yourself, you don't necessarily have other people that you can bounce things off at that top level. Networking groups can be a good place where that sort of discussion can occur. I'll come back to a con on that in a moment. They can also be quite inexpensive. So typically pricing can range from, I mean, some of them are free. Otherwise, they could range from the cost of a meal right through to a full membership, whether it be quarterly, monthly, annually, whatever. On some of the challenges to look out for with networking groups is that often it'll be an open forum. So it's not one-on-one. So you need to be aware that there's no, more often than not, there's no confidentiality agreements or anything like that in networking groups. So what you're saying to John over a coffee could quite end up being spoken about to Pete, the next door neighbor, and down the track. So just be aware of the confidentiality side of things. And with that being an issue, it's also important to with the confidentiality side of things being an issue and with it being an open forum, sometimes there'll be a reluctance to discuss a particular topic in a great level of detail, especially if it's getting into the financial side of things. So like anybody, when you're giving advice, you can only offer advice on information that's known. So you need to be a little bit careful in what you're acting upon, because you may be hearing advice which is only based on certain facts and may not have all the facts. So just be aware of that. Also, one of the other challenges is that, like any meeting, it's running to a time frame and a set agenda. So that means that people who are attending can sometimes find themselves competing for time. So if you're going along with a particular issue in mind that you're wanting to get some advice about, again, you might not have the time required to really drill down and understand the detail or the reasoning behind that challenge that you've got at that particular time. So all of these particular things really summarize to mean, they all summarize to say that it really can be difficult to identify the root cause of a problem in a networking environment. Sometimes you might need to go outside of that. Another thing just to look out for, again, there's networking groups and there's networking groups, but just to be aware, sometimes you can find yourself in a networking group full of people who are purely interested in selling their own services, as opposed to actually trying to help other people, or as opposed to network. So just be aware, but it can be a pro, it can be a con, something to be aware of. If you're in a group with people just trying to sell, the entire group can become quite superficial, and you'll find there'll be a high turnover of members and whatnot in groups like that as well. So just, again, like I say, just something to be aware of. The people who attend those groups aren't necessarily ingrained in your business either. So look, like I say to clients as well, like any advice, listen to everything and take what works for you and then apply that yourself. So that's really the key things to be aware of when it comes to networking. As for when networking groups are appropriate, it's really any time for whatever reason you're choosing to attend at that point in time. Sometimes it can be good to go just for individual learning. If you've got a specific issue, by all means, toss it around and see what comes from it. Like I say, there's often other people have gone through similar things, so it's always good to get a bit of feedback on how others have done it, because it is lonely at the top. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the networking side of things. I'll roll straight on to business coaching. Business coaching, and again, we're getting more into the advice side of things. Excuse me. There's plenty of business coaches around, and typically business coaches will focus on the individual. So they'll look at coaching the owner or the director of that business and coaching them on how businesses operate. And I'm saying businesses in quotes, because businesses follow the formula that everybody knows. It's your revenue up top, less your COGS, less your overheads equals your net profit. And there's typical formulas which can be applied to a broad range of businesses, and that's the process that business coaches will follow and apply to their broad range of customers, if you will. And I'm not saying it's wrong by any stretch, but just be mindful that obviously within each business and within each industry, there's going to be external factors, or there's going to be factors that apply to just your business or just your industry. So just be aware, if you're going down the business coach road, just understand that the person delivering the coaching will often be coming at it from a wider generic business perspective. And again, it's not to say that it's wrong by any stretch, but it may not necessarily be specific for your particular business. As for when, on business coaching as well, really good, by the way, for developing individuals. So if you've got somebody in the startup space and somebody who doesn't know much about business, a business coach probably makes sense, because it will give that broad, the broad understanding of what's required and when and all that sort of thing. Also, if you're looking to transition family members, if you're looking to maybe you transition out and transition the next generations through, you can get a business coach in to get them trained up on the same things. They often won't want to get involved with training the broader team for obvious reasons, but they will keep to those key people. So that's just something to be aware of. As for when, startups a great time for business coaching. And that's pretty much it on the business coaching side of things. I'll hand back over to Leon for professional advisors.
Thanks, Chris. And one of the things to understand is what we're talking about is exploring options here. None of these options are mutually exclusive. So you can have business coach, networking, advisory panel, and they can all be going on together, or quite often the next area I'm going to talk about is it will supplement all of those, even the formal board. So businesses at certain times will have needs for specific advice, and just because you have a board or advisory board, and you might have accountants, lawyers, or whatever, and I'll use legal as example. You've got a legal issue and you have a lawyer on your formal board, you are not going to get that person as a board member to give you the advice. They will help you scoping the work and getting the work done, but that should not be their job. There's a difference between the job as a director and the job of someone giving and acting specifically to address an issue. So legal is often one of those. So professional advisors will often need to be brought in at any time, regardless of the other structures you might have to get advice. And the skills of the advisory board or the board or even your business coach can help in scoping to get that work done right, and address the issue, identify the issue and address the issue effectively. They will usually be for specific issue, specific time, and that job's done. Now, it doesn't mean you have professional advice from your lawyer and once they're finished, they're no longer your lawyer. It just means that they're finished with that task and they might come back a year later to address another task or something like that. So professional advisors are often used in the beginning to start up when you don't have the need or the resources for regular panels. Then they will come in again later on to address specific issues and address the issue, finish it and move on, and might come back again. They can be long-term or short-term depending on the issue that's being addressed, but it is specific to a certain aspect. They are engaged, paid for that advice and move on. They don't stay around afterwards, and they're like the boards, there's a whole lot of issues being addressed. There's no chat or anything like that. It's usually they're outsourced, they're not internally. They work remote and just come and do what they need to. So that's the supplemental professional advisors that will be needed from time to time. Over to Chris to talk to something else that's dear to our hearts.
Thank you, Leon. This next one is our own monthly service programs, and this is an alternative that's proved quite popular with our clients, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is, well, the main one, I suppose, really, is the fact that we've specifically designed our monthly or quarterly service programs to pick up as many of the pros for all the different options that we've just discussed and eliminate as many of the negatives as we possibly could. We put a lot of time and energy into making sure that we got that mix right. And so I'll just explain briefly what it is. I realize some people on the call will, some people on the line already know, but just for those who will be watching it later. In short, the monthly service program, or we do quarterlies as well, we start with a monthly review of your accounts and we close them off wherever possible. The reason we start there is because you want to be able to have confidence, and your advisors want to be able to have confidence in the numbers that they're looking at. So you want to make sure that the starting point's right. From there, it's all about helping you understand your business and achieve your goals. So, and we do that through a structured monthly meeting or quarterly, if it's a quarterly service program. And yeah, it's about taking that time to work on the business and not in the business. We cover off a broad range of topics. We'll cover off marketing, sales, targets. Are they being achieved? If not, why? Pros is well, number one, we are advisors. We're also ingrained in your business because we're across your numbers on a regular basis, monthly basis. You've got that business confidant that you can ask those questions to, who actually understands your business. The structured meetings provide a level of accountability because, as Leon was saying, each meeting will have, or certainly should have, follow-up items or post-meeting matters and action items from it. And it's not uncommon to get just before the next meeting, and then one of my clients will say, "Oh, Chris, I was supposed to do this. Here it is here." I go, "Okay, cool, thanks." Hey, at least it got done. Whereas otherwise, if you didn't have that meeting, it'd probably be another 2 months, and then you'd be asking the question again. So that level of accountability actually works really well. Some of the other benefits: you've got a designated consultant. It's linked in with the marketing and the rest of it. You're trying to identify problems before they become problems. So you've got that confidence, full confidentiality, obviously. From the con side of things, something to be aware of is that it is only coming from one perspective. Whereas when you've got a board of advisors, as Leon's saying, you've got the legal, you've got the other professions that are up there as well. Whereas we're just coming from the accounting and the advisory side of things, accounting and the business advisory side of things. That being said, we're certainly not opposed to advising for external. Like if there's something that comes up that requires external input, we'll definitely flag it for those reasons. And the fact that it's even being recognized is a positive as well. Behind the scenes on the monthly service program, and I realize this is going on video, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but behind the scenes, we've actually got a rotating agenda, a rotating topic rather, because we like to bring a little extra something each month to those meetings. So we've got rotating topics behind the scenes every 24 months where we will introduce an extra topic just to cover off on and just to raise the question. The reason it's 24 months is because things change over time. So even if like estate planning is one of them that's on the list, asset protection is one of them that's on the list. And over 2 years, you can imagine things change. So if it's just important to ask those questions again, which is why we've got that rotating in the background. So that works quite well. Enough about that. That pretty much wraps up the board and the advisory kind of structures, the different options there. Each one's got its pros and cons, obviously. None of them are wrong, and they'll all suit different businesses at different times. Like Leon has said several times, none of them are mutually exclusive, and things like actually the monthly service program actually goes quite well to support any of those other formal boards or advisory boards as well, because it provides that documentational structure as well, because it comes with the the monthly financials and everything like that. So that wraps up that side of things. We do have some questions that have come in. Thank you for those who sent those in. And I realize a couple of them actually, excuse me, a couple of them aren't actually attending today, but I'll flick over to Leon for the first one and we'll run through these questions first, if we may, and then we'll open it to the floor for any attendees if anybody had any questions themselves. But let's go through these first. Leon, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. As we said, we try to make these as interactive as possible. So the first session here, we're trying to give you the groundwork and the alternatives of what's available. And now we're taking the questions. And the first one's from Alice Rue, who unfortunately sent a message just before the meeting that she had a problem came up. And she's certainly got a good question here because she's got about 6 questions in one. Thanks, Alice. So I'll read, because it's involved, I will have to read it. What are your thoughts on more seasonal or dynamic boards for businesses which, whilst they may have 1 or 2 core unchanging board members, there are additional peripheral members or advisors who can be called upon for different situations a business might find themselves in? For example, there could be experts specifically for startup phase, or others required for growth, or even others for areas of tough times when business really need help. Succession or wind down. Is this workable, do you think, or should there be a set board which sits regardless of the circumstances? And I suppose in some ways we've covered a lot of this in what we've discussed before, that nothing's mutually exclusive and that it's all about what's right for your business. So the formal board part of it, and having some people there in longevity and sticking to the strategy and understanding the strategy is really important, having longevity. But bringing people on and changing that board at time to time, or the advisory board, and bringing in expertise as required is extremely important. So the one thing to consider is that we should not ever think of a board, advisory or anything as being static. It's not written in stone, that it should be dynamic, as Alice used the word, that you will bring people in to suit the circumstances and needs of the business at the time. And if you need to change members on a board, then so be it. And that should be not a criticism of what the person has done before now. In most cases, it's the circumstances have changed and you need a new set of skills. As we said, that gap analysis at the beginning, that the business is in need of at the moment, and you bring those skills into the time. And some of those might be shorter term, but some longer term. So very much dynamic. And it, if you've got a formal board, you'd want to keep some skills and expertise and knowledge there that has some consistency, but bringing in people and the expertise as you need it is what it's all about, because it's all about advice to make your business grow, prosper, de-risk and succeed. So do what you need to do for the business at the time. And the last thing is that any board or advisory also should have its own, they should be reviewed, have their own KPIs. Are they performing? Are they delivering? And this will go to a question that comes up later. So if the board is not doing what's need to be best for the business at the time, then it is time to change the board as well. So boards have KPIs just like you do for managers and anyone else. Over to you, Chris, for the next question. That's someone looking to retire.
Thank you. Yes, this question came in anonymously, but I think I know who it's from anyway, if it's from one of my clients. I'm looking to retire. Can a board help me with this? Can I rely on a board to run my business for me? The answer to this one really does depend. It depends on what you're actually looking to achieve. In this instance, I'll relate a little bit back to the client, and I'll sort of use those circumstances. So in this instance, they're looking to retire and retain the business and and essentially become a silent shareholder to make sure that the business can run without them and they retain the shares. So a number of things to consider for this one is how soon, like when are we looking for this to happen? What needs to be in place before it can happen? In this instance, they are looking to step back and yes, monitor, because they've spent the time to build this business, but at the same rate, they don't want to be involved in the daily operations or the daily running. So in that instance, they do want to abdicate their responsibility for running the business. So when that's the case, you really are looking at bringing on board another director or a formal type board, so as decisions can be made and the business can move forwards in your absence, because you've got somebody else driving that business then. Remember, advisory boards can really only give advice. They can't make decisions. So that's why it needs to be somebody at that director level if you're looking to step back completely. But again, your role needs to be replaced before you're doing that. That's actually a good question, and I could go into that a lot deeper, but I'll keep it high level, mindful of the time. So I'll keep that high level. Over to you, Leon, for the next one. Thank you.
And that one too, that could be transitioning over time from, stepping back from, non-executive director, like one of my examples I used before.
Absolutely.
And moving back. So again, quite often the answer to a lot of these questions are, it depends. Next question came in from another one of our clients. We tried an advisory board and we didn't feel we were getting value. Did we do something wrong? It seemed like we had just regular meetings, little outcomes at the end. I've written down one word here is accountability. And if you recall some of the things I said at the beginning, I do know these people, and no offense to them, but there was a lack of structure, which was really the problem that happened back in their time when they tried this. They didn't have regular board meetings structured for certain dates. They didn't have formal agendas. They didn't have board papers that went out in advance for people to have decisions or to make decisions upon. So what happened was they were spending far too much time sitting around a board table talking about the things instead of having the information in front of them, being prepared and being there to make decisions. So that structure is really important, and holding those people accountable. In this instance, there was also a number of family members involved in the board, and there were some conflicts that existed within that. So the structure of a board and having in the constitution of that board and having processes and everything like that are really important. I have not seen a board that is well structured and well managed not work and add value, but I have seen plenty of ineffective boards that have been unstructured not add value. So it comes down to getting all those things in place and doing things right to get the right outcome.
I'll just jump in.
It is, sorry, I will say I mentioned earlier about the difference between not-for-profits and for-profits, and that can sometimes be the challenge when you have people voluntary sitting on boards. And when we talk about boards, we go down as low, probably not the right word to use, but P&C committees, tuck-shop committees, the local netball or rugby league, you've got people there, they're unpaid, quite often don't have experience. So those, just putting a few little structures around those, let's call them more informal boards, can make a huge difference and make them more effective. It's not just at business level that we're talking about that. Chris, over to you to the next one. Someone wants to take time away from their business, which is one you alluded to before. You're muted, Chris.
Rookie. There's always one, isn't it? And this time it was me. Sorry, all. This one could actually almost be tied in with that first question of mine. Is this one, they did put their name to this one. This one's Peter C, and I know who this is, another client as well. I know who this is. Can I just add to Leon something just before I answer this question, just in follow up from yours? Often on an advisory board, if you're in there for a particular project or to sort out a particular problem, if you're doing your job, you should get to an end where that particular problem's being sorted. Yes, sometimes there may be the next one, but I've certainly had the instance before where you get to a point and you go, right, well, this was the problem. This has now been fixed. This has been achieved. And at that point, the best thing you can do is, and this is where you say you sort of need to be impartial to an extent, because the best thing you can do is say, hey, you need to stop paying me because we've now done this. And then it's because if you carry it on, then it turns into a talk fest and you're no longer progressing. So it's maybe then that's the time to step back and get in the next person to take it to whatever that next thing is, whether that's the marketing side of the plan that's being put together or whatever that is. But anyway. Okay, this next question quickly is, I want to take some time away from my business and travel with the family for 12 months or so. Can a board help me with this while I'm away? And if yes, can I get rid of them when I get back? Short answer is yes, it can. An advisory board, as we say, they can come and go, and you can get rid of them. That's no dramas at all. You wouldn't be looking at a formal board for this type of question. Reason being, actually, for this question, it's important to separate like Leon said before, it's important to separate the operations and the control for the business. So if you're a business owner that's making the decisions for the direction of the business, the control of the business, you're obviously the director and making those decisions. If you're also working in the business, you're involved in operations as well. So it's almost a no-brainer in that if you want to take 12 months off, you need to make sure that your daily role in the operations has been replaced. So you're almost at that dream spot where all small business owners want to get to, in that they can step back and their business can run without them, which is great if that's what your goal is. So can your business run without you is the first thing. If not, why not? So got to fix those things, make sure they can be in place. And then if you can just get back to that control side of things, and this is actually a benefit for the monthly service programs as well. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get set up with reports with key metrics for your business that you can still monitor while you're traveling. So you can still have that control, and you can still make decisions and step in when you need to. And you should be able to look at regular reports to see exactly how your business is traveling in your absence. And that whatever your goal may be, I just want it to maintain. I don't want it to do anything else, because your role might be sales. And if that's what you're happy with, then so be it. But if your goal is still that you want your business to grow at Y%, then make sure that you've got the relative metrics in there to make sure that you're checking that growth and checking the activity that drives that result that you're after. So short answer to your question is yes, it can. However, depending on your circumstances, be aware of how, you may want to structure that slightly differently. Is the answer to that one?
Okay, I'll add to that. Yeah, like we're on a Zoom meeting now. Like years ago, without technology where we're at now, that might have been more difficult. But I've known people that have been on boards of companies and they've gone to Spain for 12 months and still acted effectively as a board member with reports coming out, etc., while they were in Spain and the business was here in Australia. So you can have, with technology, good reporting. There's no reason why you can't be absent from your business if you've got the operational side working, that can do a board role quite effectively from distance. Yeah.
Yep, spot on.
Next one I've got here, a board would be nice, but we're a small business, and what's it going to cost me? Well, look, on that one, it will depend on which option you choose, obviously. So your advice, etc., will be pay for our advisory board, as we said, is going to be less than a formal board, and a formal board is going to be more expensive. It will depend on the number of people that you have on a board, whether it be advisory or formal. But as a rough rule of thumb for SME type business, a director of a board is probably giving up 8 to 10 hours of their month to be a director of the board, in terms of attendance at meeting, attendance, travel, reading of board papers, and other bits and pieces will come out, throughout the month. So they're giving up time. They're adding their expertise and skills that they've learned over many years, which has value and quite often qualifications. And then they're taking on risk as a formal director. So they're going to need to be paid for all those three aspects. So a formal board member would generally start at about $3,000 a month, and depending on the business complexity and involvement, would go up from that. So, if you've got, I'll jump ahead to one of the other questions. One other question further down is that someone said, what's the right number of people to have on a board? Well, depending on the number of people you've got on a board, then you might, if you've got 3 people, it's $9,000 a month, etc. To answer that number of the size of a board. It depends on the skill sets you need, as we talked about, to complement by diverse to what you already have in the business. If you have, there's one thing you can do to avoid a locked board. You can have a chairman can have a casting vote if you have an even number, but generally people would go with 3 or 5 people on a board. You can have too few and too many, but 3 to 5 is generally 3 or 5 is generally the numbers that are chosen. I have seen a not-for-profit that had 15 people on a board, and they had information paralysis and decision-making paralysis. They could never make decisions. It was far too many. So a lot of constitutions will have in there what the minimum, maximum numbers of members on a board are. But I'll give you the drum that 15 is too many, unless you're dealing with BHP or something else like that sort of thing. So in SME land or most not-for-profits, it's generally an odd number, and as few as possible is better for efficient decision-making process. I've got another one. Chris, what happened? I've got a few in a row here that you've skipped one, so I'll jump in with the next one as well, which was, we've been reasonably successful over the years, and I put this down to being agile and making quick decisions. My fear is that a board will slow down decisions, so we could miss opportunities. And that's probably a misconception, I would say. That, if you have effective board principles and processes, the board's not operational, the board is decision-making. A lot of decisions should be able to be made on a monthly basis, but that doesn't mean you can't make decisions if needed to be on the run. So there's things called flying minutes. A board paper can go out to, I've been on public boards before. A board paper will go out and say, this is the situation, this is the, the pros and cons, the financial analysis and everything like that. And the board can respond with via email or a teleconference, Zoom, Teams, whatever, and deal with those issues. So I would not be thinking in any way that a board, if it's run effectively, would slow down decision making. There's plenty of ways to make sure that decisions can be made promptly and as needed without impeding the business growth. I would also caution, though, that you shouldn't have to do that too often if you've got an effective board structure and process. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Leon. I think that's actually that's it for the questions that were submitted, and I realise we're quite short on time, but were there any questions from the floor that anybody particularly wanted answered? I can't, none have come in through the chat, but happy to take any questions if anybody's got anything there.
Guys, I have one. If you were approached by an organisation to become a board member for them, what are some of the things you would be looking to investigate before you say yes or no to the request?
Yeah, very good question. I'll jump in on that one, Dale. I'll try and keep it short. My time, I realise we're a bit late starting, but I actually just went through this process yesterday as well, approached by another company to go on their board. Look, certainly, as we said, if you've got a formal board, you're taking on risk. So you want to understand the financial position of the business, that you're not taking on any risk that you're not uncomfortable with. You want to understand whether there's any legal aspects there. You need to understand what's the constitution, the makeup of the board, that you are complementary, you're adding value to the skills, and you should have some understanding. They should be able to brief you on where they're going and what they're trying to achieve, so that you're going to be certain that you're adding those skills to it. Sometimes people get asked to go on boards just to access their client base and knowledge and other things like that. A question to ask is, what do you want from me on the board, and why have you asked me to be on a board is an obvious question you should ask to understand that. So so there's lots of answers to that, but risk protection for yourself is important. is there directors and officers? Insurance is another one. And be confident that you fit in well with the other board members and can add value. Thanks, Dale. Good question, but you can't get the award for the best question. We discussed at the beginning from the questions submitted. Alice Ruse snuck in with 6 questions in one, so despite her withdrawing at the last minute, we're going to give Alice the gift voucher for this quarter. So thank you, Alice, for that question. Thank you, everyone else, for the other questions. Thank you all for attending. A survey will come out shortly with just your feedback. There will be a recording of today's event, which has already been asked by a few people that could not make it. The next event is addressing an issue that we're all facing at the moment in business, that there's an acute labour shortage out there at the moment. And so finding and retaining the right staff for your business is a key issue. And that will be coming up in October. We haven't set the actual date, but that will be in October. I know many people are feeling that pain. Thank you very much for attending. And we will look forward to seeing you at Business Booster number 5. And I hope you got some value out of today. Thank you.